Hi, this is Matt at LSAT Lab, and today's lesson is on principal questions in the logical reasoning section. About 9% of all logical reasoning questions are principal questions, making it a really important type of question for you to work on in your preparation for the LSAT. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to spot a principal question. We'll focus on how you can identify the task that's being presented to you within the question stem. We'll look at reasoning structures and how they impact how we evaluate arguments. And we'll look at trap answer patterns so we can get rid of those wrong answer choices as quickly as possible. When it comes to identifying that you're looking at a principal question, you're really looking for language within the question stem that says something along the lines of principle. So whether they give you the word principle, which one of the following principles, if valid, most helps to justify the reasoning in the argument, that would do the trick. But so too would other words. So in this one, which word helps you identify that this is a principal question? If you pointed to the word propositions, you found the word that it makes this a principal question. Let's look at this one. Which word indicates that we're looking at a principle? If you pick generalizations, nice job. So we're looking for language cues that involve the idea of a general rule or a principle that can be applied to a specific situation. There are many types of principal questions. Some that ask you to justify with a principle, some that ask you to conform to a principle, some that ask you to find a principle illustrated within some statements, or parallel an underlying principle in a new argument, or find the underlying principle, or contradict a principle. Right? Many different tasks that you can be asked to do, but they're all relying on a generalization. So let's start by looking at the most common type of principal question, those that ask you to justify an argument with a principle. Here's the question stem. Which one of the following principles, if valid, would most help to justify the sociologist's argument? We're being asked to most help to justify the sociologist's argument. So justify tells us that we're looking to strengthen the argument here. Go ahead and give this one a try. When you found an answer that you like, hit play again and we'll review it together. All right, welcome back. So in this argument, the sociologist says that romantics who claim that people are not born evil, but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form, cannot be right. For they misunderstand the causal relationship between the people and their institutions. After all, institutions are merely collections of people. So in that last sentence, we have evidence to support the conclusion. It's important that we identify the conclusion, right? And the conclusion is that the romantics who claim that people are not born evil, but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form, the argument is that that claim is wrong, that it cannot be right. For they misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. That's the evidence. So the last sentence provides a premise. The second half of the first sentence provides an intermediate conclusion. And the first half of the first sentence represents the conclusion. Right? So we are trying to support the claim that the romantics cannot be right. And the reason for that is that they misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. So the reasoning structure here is based off of causation. Causation plays a role in about 12% of principal questions, so it's not a dominant player. But in this case, what we have is an argument that's basically saying that we are misunderstanding the causal relationship between people and their institutions. They're saying institutions are merely collections of people. So what is the relationship between people and institutions according to this argument? Well, the sociologist is trying to refute the romantics, and the romantics are saying that people are not born evil, but made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form. Right? So that can't be right. So if it's wrong that people are not born evil, then the author, the sociologist, is basically saying that people are born evil. The romantics are saying that people are made evil by the imperfect institutions. The sociologist is saying that it's not the institutions that make the people evil, but rather the people who make the institutions evil. So the sociologist is essentially saying that it's the many, the members of the group that determine the character of the group, not the group or institution that's determining the character of the people or the individual members of that group. Right? So it's going to go from people to institution. That's what we're trying to support with this principle. Any answer choice that says that it's going from institution to people would undermine the argument and would be wrong. Answer choice A says that people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than can people acting individually. Well, here we're talking about people in institutions doing more good or evil. So this is how much good or evil people can do when they're in institutions. But this does not talk about the causal relationship, about whether the people create the institutions or whether the institutions create the people. So answer choice A is bringing up an irrelevant relationship. Answer choice B says that institutions formed by people are inevitably imperfect. Okay, well, so this is talking about institutions that are imperfect. It does say that they're formed by people. Do we know why they're imperfect? Is it their institutions, or is it because they're formed by people? We don't know. So answer choice B is, again, another irrelevant relationship. Answer choice C says that people should not be overly optimistic in their view of individual human beings. Well, whether or not people should be overly optimistic doesn't really tell us about the relationship between people and the institutions that they form. So this is going to be another irrelevant relationship. Answer choice D says that a society's institutions are the surest gauge of that society's values. So this seems to be suggesting that institutions reflect a society's values. It sure doesn't tell us how they got there. So whether or not it's the institutions that created the values that the people then absorbed, or whether it's the people who created the institutions and it's their values that are rubbing off or creating that of the institutions. So it doesn't really tell us, even if they're indicative of each other, it doesn't really tell us how they relate to each other, which one is the responsible party here. So answer choice D is simply too weak. Answer choice E says that the whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it. So this sounds like an abstract description of a relationship between a whole and the things that comprise it. And answer choice E doesn't say that it's the people that create the institutions, but it does say that it's not the case that the institutions create the people. So this rules out the alternative cause, right? The reverse direction of the cause, and makes the argument here more likely to be true. So this would do most to justify the reasoning and is the right answer. Now let's look at a type where we're being asked to conform to a principle. So the question might say, the reasoning above conforms most closely to which one of the following propositions? So we've got reasoning above in the argument, we've got a proposition in the answer choices, and then we need to find the proposition or the principle that conforms to the reasoning. Go ahead and give this one a try. When you've found an answer that you like, hit play again, and we'll review it together. All right, welcome back. In this one, we're told that car companies solicit consumer information on such human factors as whether a seat is comfortable or whether a seat of controls is easy to use. However, designer interaction with consumers is superior to survey data. Notice that word superior. This is a comparison being made here. They're saying that designer interaction with consumers is superior, better than survey data. Okay. The data may tell the designer why a feature on last year's model was given a low rating, but data will not explain how that feature needs to be changed in order to receive a higher rating. So they're basically justifying the argument that interaction with consumers is superior to survey data because of the things that designer interaction with consumers can provide that survey data cannot provide. So if we're looking at the reasoning structure here, we see that there's a comparison being made between interactions with consumers and survey data. And they're saying that interactions with consumers is superior to survey data, right? Because survey data can't give them information about what kinds of changes need to be made in order to improve the car. Answer choice A says that getting consumer input for design modification can contribute to successful product design. Well, this is saying that consumer input can contribute to successful product design, that it's a good thing. That seems like it's in line with the reasoning in the stimulus. Let's hold on to answer choice A and see what else they give us. Answer choice B says that car companies traditionally conduct extensive post-market surveys. Well, we're talking about extensive post-market surveys, and is there any reason to believe that these car companies are doing this? Not according to the reasoning. The argument never says whether or not these surveys are extensive or are extensively conducted. So answer choice B is simply too strong. Answer choice C says that designers aim to create features that will appeal to specific market niches. Well, the idea that we're talking about specific market niches, that was never discussed in the reasoning, so that's out of scope. Answer choice D says that a car will have unappealing features if consumers are not consulted during its design stage. This seems connected to the reasoning. Unappealing features if consumers are not consulted. The reasoning seems to be suggesting that if consumers are consulted, that will improve the quality of the design. So answer choice D looks like it's presenting a negation of the relationship within the argument. It's not that they will have unappealing features if consumers are not consulted, but that if consumers are consulted, it will have fewer unappealing features. So answer choice D is a negation. Answer choice E says consumer input affects external rather than internal design components of cars. Well, that distinction between external rather than internal design components was never alluded to within the reasoning. This is an unsupported relationship, and so we can get rid of it. Which means that answer choice A was the best we got. It's the one that conforms most to the reasoning, that consumer input for designers is helpful in the process of designing a car. Answer choice A is the right answer. Here's one more type of principle question we're going to look at in this lesson. The idea that we're going to illustrate a principle from or within some statements. So the question stem may say something like, which one of the following propositions is most clearly illustrated by the passage? Give this one a try. When you think you've got an answer that you like, hit play again, and we'll review it together. All right, welcome back. So in this one, hospitals, universities, labor unions, and other institutions may well have public purposes and be quite successful at achieving them, even though each of their individual staff members does what he or she does only for selfish reasons. So we don't have an argument here. There's no conclusion, no evidence for why it's true. We have this phrase that says even though. So these kind of somewhat juxtaposed positions. What is it that is even though? So each of their individual staff members does what he or she does only for so the individuals behave for selfish reasons, whereas the hospitals, universities, labor unions, and other institutions, we're talking about groups or wholes, may well have public purposes and be quite successful at achieving them. So we've got public purposes, the institutions are successful at achieving them, and yet the individual staff members are doing what they do for selfish reasons. And this seems to be related to the whole parts fallacy, right? You can't assume what's true of the members of a group is true of the group itself, nor can you assume what's true of the group itself is going to be true of each of the members of the group. So these statements are trying to point out the whole may have different characteristics than the members of the whole. The reasoning structure in here is comparison, in that we are comparing the whole and the individual members of the whole and talking about how they're different from each other. And we can think of this as very much the same as the first question we looked at with the institutions and the individual members of those institutions, right? We're talking about the differences between the members and the whole. So now let's look at the answer choices. Answer choice A says that what is true of some social organizations is not necessarily true of all such organizations. So the principle in answer choice A is relating some organizations to all organizations. This is going from one group to other groups, but it's not going from members of a group to the group itself. And so answer choice A is an unsupported relationship. Answer choice B says that an organization can have a property that not all of its members possess. This one is talking about an organization and the members of that organization, and that they're not exactly the same. This one looks like it's pretty good. Let's hold on to answer choice B and see what else they give us. C, people often claim altruistic motives for actions that are in fact selfish. There's a comparison going on in here, and the comparison is between what people claim and what's actually happening, right? They claim altruism, but they are in fact selfish. So there's a comparison, a contrast being made, but it's not between a member and the group to which that member belongs. So let's get rid of answer choice C. It's an unsupported relationship. Answer choice D says that many social institutions have social consequences unintended by those who founded them. Again, we have another comparison being made. We have social consequences that were unintended by those who founded those social institutions. So there's a difference between what the founders wanted and what actually happened. So we have another contrast, but a different kind of contrast, because we're talking about what was intended and what actually occurred. This is another unsupported relationship. Answer choice E says that often an instrument created for one purpose will be found to serve another purpose just as effectively. Again, another answer choice that's comparing two things. So the original purpose and the new purpose, right? And they're different. So answer choice E gives us that comparison, but it's not giving us a whole to a part or a member. This has got another unsupported relationship, not the right answer. That leaves us with answer choice B as the correct choice. On principal questions, you still want to use scope, logic, and degree as the primary focus for your trap answers. We're just going to be borrowing different trap answers from other question types. So when it comes to principal questions that are a lot like an inference question, we have to look out for the trap answers that would be common to inference questions. And when we get to a principal question that's common or similar to an assumption question, we want to look out for trap answers that are common to assumption questions, which means that we have a lot of traps here. But if we can reference our task, then that will help us with figuring out which traps to avoid. With regard to scope, look out for entry choices that use or include the wrong trigger, the wrong sufficient condition. Look out for entry choices that outer scope, and then look out for entry choices that use the wrong outcome or the wrong necessary condition. Look out for entry choices that are weakening the argument when you're supposed to be justifying it. Look out for entry choices that contradict the statements when you're trying to conform to them. Reversals and negations are also a common way in which you might be looking for a conditional relationship, and they might get you to fall for one that's similar. And then irrelevant relationships just build a relationship between two terms from the argument. So it's familiar, but it's not actually doing any work. And then once you're getting close to the finish line, keep in mind the degree. So some tasks will prefer that you have stronger answer choices, in which case you'll want to look out for answer choices that are too weak, while others will want that you have a more reserved answer choice, in which case you have to look out for an answer choice that's potentially too strong. In summary, you spot a principal question with words like principle, proposition, or generalization. There are different tasks that they can set up for you. Either you're asked to justify with a principle or conform to a principle, or illustrate a principle from within a set of statements, or maybe duplicate a principle that's underlying an argument from the stimulus with one that's underlying an argument in the answer choices or paralleling it. You might be asked to find a principle that underlies the argument, or an idea that would contradict a stated principle. When it comes to reasoning structures, in principal questions, 66% of them use conditional logic, 34% of them use comparison, and 12% of them use causal reasoning structures. The trap answer patterns to pay attention to: using wrong triggers or wrong outcome, out of scope, weakening the argument, having an answer choice that's either too weak or too strong, reversing or negating a conditional relationship or a principle, or contradicting statements as opposed to conforming to them. So that's it for today's lesson on principal questions. I invite you to check out these other lessons or visit us today at lsatlab.com.